Hi everyone, welcome to Introduction to Programming. This is lecture 16. In this lecture, I'm talking about for loops. So this is building on our previous lecture about while loops, and then we'll solve some small problems on for loops. Some of the rules to remember for any kind of loop, and this is taken from the lecture from while loops, is that we must initialize, give a condition, specify action, increment or decrement. Now the way we will be handling this in for loops is slightly different, but all these rules should be kept in mind whenever you're writing a loop. The difference between a for loop and a while loop is that a for loop is a counted loop. So we essentially know how many iterations are required to accomplish a task. The objects on which for loops work, just like in case of while loops as well, is that we will iterate over an iterable that would be a list, a range of numbers or a sequence of numbers, or even on strings, right? So we can iterate over every element and then we could manipulate or do some computation using those iterables. That's the idea of a for loop. Now before jumping into Spider and writing our own loop, this is the syntax that you must remember. The way I like to remember it is by saying for some variable in iterable. That iterable would be a list, a tuple, a string, and I forgot to add that it could be a range of or a sequence of numbers as well. And we'll see that in the examples. On the right hand side, you can see how this is written. For C, that means it is any variable, right? That could go inside this set of iterables and take that value. So essentially I'm saying for every variable in this given iterable, go and print that variable, which is my C. Now this would make better sense if we go to Spider and start writing our own loop. So let's do that, right? Let's take this example and I'm saying for, and for is a keyword because I'm writing a for loop, right? For I in my string, which is in this case A, B, C, D, right? Go and print, and this colon is important. Go and print this I. Now notice that this I is something that would in every iteration of the loop take all these values that are given in this iterable, right? Which is my string. Let me go and run this. As you can see, the output is every element of my string. Now similarly, I could go and create a list. Let's say my list is L and it has these elements 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I want to go and print all the elements in my list. The way I would do that is I would say for I, which is my variable in iterable, which is L, right? I can straight away say for I in L, print I. Right? So this I is taking the values that are there in my L. Okay, so this is essentially telling you that you can go and access every element in the iterable and do something with it. For example, let's say a little variation of this would be that I'm trying to print the number that is there in the list multiplied by 3. Let's say that's the problem. So I would just say for I in L, because again I have to go and access those elements, and then simply go and create this another variable that would say 3 times I. So in every iteration, this is essentially showing you that I can add more computation or my block of code, and then in every iteration go and print my V, right? And what is happening to that V? It's getting updated with the value of I in my iteration, right? Now go back and check. 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12, and then 3 times 5 is 15, and this is what we wanted, right? Now, a small, like a subtle thing that I wanted to like point out here is that I could do something like this here, and then say go and print this I. And then let's see what happens to the values that are printed. Right? Because this is something that causes a lot of confusion, so I wanted to make sure. Now I'm saying go and say for I in L, so go and get these values here. Then I'm also updating I, right? I'm also updating this I. Now what happens inside the loop is that the values of my list will stay the same because I'm not going and updating my L in any ways, right? I'm simply saying this is some variable, go and pick the values in L, but that does not update my L. And this is like a fundamental confusion that happens when we start with loops, which is why I wanted to clarify this early on. I'm not updating L. All I'm saying is go and create this variable again, or do dynamic typing with this I, this variable, and then go and print that I. That's all that's happening here. My L would still stay the same, and I would again go and pick those values from my L, right? So this is what's happening here. Now another variation that we would be using a lot is by using the range function. We talked about the range function earlier, and this is saying, let me just write a small problem saying that produce all leap years, and this would demonstrate how the range function would work in the range 2000 to 2050, right? And this is a classic example of where we can use the range function, because range is going to generate a sequence of numbers, and that's what I can do here. So I will just write for x, some variable, remember that's the syntax, in range, start, stop, step. That's how my range function works. So I need to start at 2000, right? And then I need to stop at 2050, or in fact, if I want to include 2050 and I don't know if it's a leap year or not, I would just do a 2051, but let's leave it there. Let's say it is a leap year and I don't want to include it, right? And then give the step size. If I do not give the step size, the default is 1. That's already known to us. And then go and print my x, right? Go and print it. Let's see what happens here. Now all those years, and as I said, until 2048 are printed, and this is skipping by 4, right? So the range function essentially lets you create that sequence of numbers, and this is quite often used in for loops. Another variation of this would be that you have a list to access. Let's say I have this list L. Let me actually take it down and then begin here, right? So let's say I have this list L, and that has some values, A, and these are string values, right? B, and then another value C. I need to access these elements now. Like one way would be to say for variable in L, another would be to say for I, which is my variable, in range length of this L, right? Because I'm saying go and create this range of a, like, or go and create a sequence of these numbers that's equal to the length of this, right? And this I would be actually indexing these values now, right? And then one way to go and get the values is by saying print, and this is like an alternate way of doing it. Go and print that L and get this value. Go and get this value. So this is an alternate way of doing what we did earlier, right? Go and get that value. So I'm essentially indexing, right? The way indexing works is this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, which is why I'm generating range length of L, because remember, and this is just a reminder, range function will not take this value. So it would, length is 3, but I would go from 0, 1, 2, and this is what happens. I get all 3 as output, right? So this was the basic of for loops. One thing to remember is sometimes you might be using this as well, and I just wanted to point that out, that you might want to go in and create a list sometimes, but that's not required in for loops. But just like a small reminder, sometimes if you're trying to actually create a list using the range function, you would have to go and do a list range of like whatever values you're trying to create, right? Range in itself is not a list, but it is a sequence, and it pretty much covers everything that we need for this statement when we are writing for loops. So you don't really need that list here. It is automatically handling that for you. So this was all about for loops. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.